This episode's made possible by Planful. Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Planning Aces. On today's show, we'll be featuring the FP&A insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including CFO Joel Campbell of TreviPay, CFO Rob Goldenberg of Syxsense, CFO Matt Gusky of WooCommerce. This is Jack Sweeney, your co-host, along with performance management guru Brett Knowles, who will serve as co-host and resident thought leader as we seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of Planning Aces. Brett Knowles joins us after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Planful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Planful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Planful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Planful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hi, it's Jack Sweeney, and I'm here with Brett Knowles. So, Brett, what's new? What's happening? What's grabbing headlines out there?
Well, what was that adage? It doesn't matter why you're in the news, just so long as you're in the news.
Was that like Marshall McLuhan?
Yeah, well, there's something that says like any publicity is good publicity or something like that.
Now that's P.T. Barnum.
Well, so it's interesting because I've looked up a bunch of these quotes, and they're always attributed to great people, like Patton said this or Churchill said that, and I eventually figured out that people quote famous people from their culture. The same quote that Churchill said, apparently Patton said, and so forth. And then when you look it up, of course, it turns out it was some guy in 6 AD that came up with it, and everyone's just been rephrasing it ever since then.
Well, during my reporting days, I had an editor who just loved to say there are no new stories, just new reporters. And kind of took the wind out of your sails.
Well, that's a good way to set ourselves up for today. I think we might learn new things today, though. I beg to differ.
Well, it wasn't intended to be a commentary on our efforts here to produce another episode. And I do think we have three outstanding planning aces to discuss with you today.
Are we recording at this point, or do I have to remind you to do that again?
Oh, gosh. All right. From P.T. Barnum on forward, the answer is yes. And actually, I meant to mention to you before we came on that one of our planning aces mentions the rule of 40 again. And this is popping up all the time now in our conversations. It seems like everybody has their rule of 40. And it was only a couple episodes back that we explored it a little more in detail. But what do you make of that?
So the rule of 40, and you're right. There's a multitude of rules of 40, and it seems like every industry has its own. I think the interesting part is more the journey towards finding appropriate measures for your business, and certainly with the types of businesses that are out there, many of the old metrics just don't work anymore. And I really like when I begin hearing CFOs who are pausing for a moment and coming to grips with what's a more appropriate measure for their environment. we think of SaaS and ARR obviously as a new metric that didn't exist before or existed in some other format. And that's just an example of many that I think cause all of us FP&Ers to just pause for a moment and figure out what we should really be looking at.
I like that. I like the metric journey, or maybe the journey toward a better metric. And I do think the three planning aces we feature, aka CFOs we feature, make clear that's what it's about. Where it's CFO Joel Campbell of TreviPay, who really shares with us his arrival inside a private equity backed firm and the metrics he's determined to master. And then we go to WooCommerce CFO Matt Gusky, who really takes us on a metric journey, one that's focused on profitability and discovering how to drive profitability. And then Sixth Sense CFO Rob Goldenberg, who similarly to Campbell begins telling us about his arrival chapter and some insights that he has as he realizes the company needs to begin looking at its TAM in a different way. But anyway, it's all sort of how they arrive and they begin trying to change how the organization looks at the world and contributing to that with their past experiences. What do you think? How'd I do?
Um, yeah, but their outcomes are different. But absolutely, and just that pausing for a moment to think about what are the appropriate measures. And it's hard to tell whether strategy drives the measures or measures drive the strategy. And I think as we talk through the three great CFOs you found today, that story will come to the surface.
Okay, well, let's kick things off. And we'll begin with, of course, Joel Campbell, CFO of TreviPay, who was featured on episode 917 of CFO Thought Leader. Here's what Joel shared.
Well, the great thing about me coming into TreviPay was I had no experience with private equity whatsoever. I mean, I knew about them, read about them in the news, but I didn't really understand how they think and how they work. So there was a tremendous learning curve, I'll call it, for the first 9 to maybe even 18 months of learning how they think and how they work. A couple of the metrics that I was introduced to that I had little to no experience with is the Rule of 40, which is a 40% combination of your top line revenue growth and your EBITDA margin has to equal 40% or higher and growing over time. So when you think about that in light of where I had come from in a public company, there's no public company that will probably ever get to that kind of Rule of 40, or maybe only a handful. So it was a completely new concept in thinking about how to run the company for the leverage it could generate in top line revenue growth and then dropping as much of that revenue as you can into the EBITDA line. Completely new concept. We manage to it monthly. We report out it to our board and audit committee as well as our ownership structure on a routine basis. So very important metric for us to track. The second metric that we track, which I had some familiarity with before, we're getting a little bit better in granularity, but in this B2B payment space is gross margin. Kind of looking at what is the revenue you're generating, what is the cost to get that revenue, the cost of selling to get that revenue, and then how do you think about that gross margin over time and getting expansion in gross margin to show that you can really operate and leverage the business to operate as efficiently and productively as you possibly can. We're blessed, just given the structure that we have. We have, gross margins in the kind of the low 80% range, which is tremendous for this type of business. Other competitors, particularly some of our smaller competitors, are not at that level, which gives you some element of we're kind of at scale, and we're progressing and trying to push ourselves forward in the gross margin we can generate. But those are two metrics that we kind of live and die by. I think the last thing I would say is the discipline I think I have brought from public companies, particularly around liquidity management, as I think about the recent banking crisis. When you think about what's happened with some of those banks, a number of fintechs had money in Silicon Valley Bank and some of the other smaller regional banks. I think I brought a discipline to the company around how we manage our short-term cash, our excess cash that we generate, where we put it, who we invest it with, making sure there's a large corporate capital provider that sits behind those funds where we're investing. But I think I brought some of that discipline to the company. I wouldn't say that it hadn't been there before, but a much more pointed view, so that when you get into the recent credit crisis or the recent banking crisis, you see that that discipline allows us to demonstrate to our ownership structure and our board, we're good. We're taken care of. We got money in the right places. We're well diversified. We've really thought through some of those issues. So I think some of that public company discipline I've been able to bring to the table.
Well, that was Joel Campbell. Again, episode 917 on CFO Thought Leader. If you missed Joel's episode, you wanna give it a listen. He came up the treasury track, holding a variety of he's held a variety of treasury positions at Ameriprise Financial, Western Union, H&R Block, where he was also the chief risk officer. So he made an investment in his career all along the way, it seems, in terms of years and how he built it. But he steps in to the CFO office at this private equity-backed company, TreviPay. And as he shares with us his take on the metrics that are top of mind for him, including the Rule of 40, what did you make of what Joel shared?
Well, certainly, yeah, it's interesting that he sort of came up with three top of mind metrics. And the Rule of 40, an interesting model to use. And I like the way that he uses it. He uses it as a way to express the leverage of the organization. Like, I loved his term, how can it leverage itself to generate top line revenue growth and then drop as much as you can down to EBITDA. Like, I like that whole idea of this business is an investment instrument, and we have to think about it in that context and where we can best find opportunities. So I liked his Rule of 40 and how he began using that. But the other two metrics are related to it, right? So he talks about gross margin and, the focus that puts on efficiency and, being economical. And even though they've got a high number, right? He says he's in the low 80s, which is pretty phenomenal. We'd all die to be in that range. He's still looking for what else he can do to improve that number. So I like the way that he's got this overall concept, sort of a combined metric in the Rule of 40, and then he decomposes that and makes sure that we're looking at each element to try to figure out how best to optimize that element.
I thought referencing cash management as number 3 was meaningful to him.
There's an interesting twist on it, right? Because the first two are sort of operational, transactional stuff. Liquidity is entirely his area's domain. He's entirely responsible for how they manage short-term cash. And that becomes an important attribute. Now, it's interesting because we've seen some organizations, they pick on a metric like that because historically that's been this huge opportunity. And it'd be fun to talk to Joel in 5 years' time to see if he's still tracking that. Or is that something he's tracking now because it's a current issue? And once they've got that process nailed, that'll sort of fall to the wayside. I don't think the 40% will. I'm not sure gross margin ever will. But this liquidity management, I'm guessing, is dealing with a short-term need.
Rob Goldenberg, CFO of Sixth Sense, is our next planning ace. He's from, this was recorded for episode 924 of CFO Thought Leader. Rob shared an anecdote with us where he sort of is on a customer, trying to discover the secret to customer success. And along the way, it really becomes a story about TAM, total addressable market. We'll let Rob Goldenberg explain. Here he is.
So there are a number of things, but I'll give you an example that was a huge aha moment for me, and I think positively influenced the direction of our entire company over the last 6 years and hopefully for the next 60. And we started out selling to very large enterprises. 4 of our 5 first customers were Fortune 1000. We could have continued on that track and been a $1 billion revenue company. There was plenty of TAM there. But as I got to understand our market, and as I got more to the customer side, as opposed to the narrowly defined finance side, I tried to look at it from a different perspective and said, our Fortune 1000 customers, well, one, they love us, although that's a tough term, right? You want your customers to love you. More importantly, you want your customers to do better because they bought your product. And our customers were doing exceptionally well, much better because they had our product. And then I look at it and say, what makes a successful customer? Right? I don't say, what do we need to get to $1 billion in revenue? What TAM do we need? I say, what do we need to have a successful customer? And what it came down to, and this is a year-long journey, it's like what they say about bankruptcy. You go bankrupt very slowly, then all at once. This aha moment, it went very slowly and then all at once. And the all at once was every single B2B company can massively improve their efficiency by using our product, right? So I'm not thinking about our financials. This is why it's a financial moment. I'm thinking about their financials, right? Every single one of them can have a great financial outcome for this. So now let's reverse engineer from there and say, what do we want to be as a company? And that said to me, well, don't just focus on the Fortune 1000, even though you can accomplish your goals that way, you being 6sense as a company. Focus on every B2B company. And what do we have to do to be able to provide this value to every B2B company in the world? And that became, actually, it's probably my strongest held opinion at the time. Try not to form opinions quickly. And if I have an opinion, I got to make sure that I can argue the other side better than the other side can, because this was a big change and it would require a multi-year product journey, right? It means the outlook for our business and the complexion of our business would be on a very new trajectory. But I don't see how you don't want to put your product in the hands of every company that's going to be successful.
I think his comments were interesting in contrast to Joel. So Joel, the first person we listened to, interesting about how he's used this rule of 40 and what that means and how it's allowed the company to be successful. Rob has almost come at it the other way. Joel talks about what the company's strategy is, and therefore the rule of 40 is appropriate for him. Rob's come at it kind of a different way. He's kind of said, using this whole metric about, what his business offers, he determined that the market that they were looking at, using the metric of, just to sneak to his line was every B2B can massively improve their efficiency by using 6sense. And so he said, gosh, that's the benefit that we offer. That's the metric that we should be held accountable for. If you want to measure, are you getting your money for 6sense? Are you seeing a massive improvement in your efficiency? If yes, we're doing our bit. So using that metric, he then tries to reverse engineer what is the market that he should be addressing. And that's the interesting part, right? Because the initial market was these large enterprises, which have these huge long sales cycles. It's hard to show your incremental benefit amongst all the other things that those large enterprises are doing to improve their efficiency. And eventually he came to the conclusion that every business is his target market, not just large enterprises. And although he didn't say it, his implication was one of the benefits of smaller organizations is you can see the impact of 6sense faster and more significantly than when it gets lost in the the mess of a large enterprise. And so he sort of drew the conclusion that given this metric of what we should be measured for and what we should measure ourselves against, let's shift our market from large enterprises to the criteria being any B2B, regardless of their size. And that's interesting because, of course, if someone else were setting the strategy, let's say sales might go, gosh, it's an entirely different sell cycle for large enterprises versus small. So instead of letting a other department set the strategy, he's letting the benefit statement or our key metric determine what the strategy might be. Here, a client told me this. He said, we've got this one employee that's only responsible for this one thing. And that person's awesome at it. They are so focused and they get that done. And, we've heard of, the current trend of objectives and key results. And the idea of OKRs is about focus. You only have 3 objectives. Each one only has 3 key results. But this CEO was saying this one person has 1 key result and gets them totally focused. And if you think about it, that's not a bad idea. Each of us should be able to figure out what is that 1 key result, what I'm going to call your golden KR. What is the one thing that the organization would hold you accountable for? And maybe if you're a sales rep, it's number of new customers or, total revenue sales or number of sales of the new product. Whatever is that one thing that we'd love you to do for the team this quarter. What if we began thinking that way? What is that one golden KR, the one thing? Now, if you think of businesses, a lot of them have it. So if you think of that FedEx adage, absolutely positively on time. What is their one key result? Did it get delivered on time? Or Domino's, 30 minutes are free. Again, very clear. McDonald's, it's all about that 3-minute turnover. So a lot of organizations have that one golden KR. And what if our golden KR for 6 Sense was the efficiency that you've gained from using us? If they focused on that, would that be a great thing for the business or would that be a bad thing? Well, what do you think? It would be a huge aligning factor because now we all have that, it's like Domino's. We absolutely understand when I think about adding a new food, I better be able to get that out the door in less than 30 minutes. When I begin thinking about where to put up a new store, it's got to be somewhere where if I do a compass within 30 minutes, I can get, a significant market. So it becomes this great aligning factor and it's simple, right? And so what I liked about Rob's comments was it's almost that golden KR informs you of what your strategy should be. It's such a clever way to think about it, to go, instead of the strategy telling us what we should chase down, what if we understand what our benefit statement is and then reverse engineer the strategy? Now, what does that mean for him? It means he's going to be addressing all B2Bs. So that's going to change what your website looks like, right? When you go to the website now, there better be one tab I would hit for his macro market. So maybe one is for enterprise, maybe one is for franchises, maybe another one is for family-run businesses. Like, I don't know what his different market segments are, but they all have that one key result. But somehow I got to shift my message so that that customer understands how what 6 Sense does applies to their market. Again, if it was sales setting the strategy, they would pick on one of those and they'd say, that's the TAM I'm going to chase down. And all these other opportunities would be lost. And so I just think it's just such an interesting conversation that must have had at that executive table.
Well, we'll move to our next planning ace, Matt Gusky, who is CFO of WooCommerce today. Matt Gusky came up the finance ranks at eBay, where he became sort of an FP&A leader and was their European finance director for a number of years. He entered the CFO office at StubHub after it was acquired by eBay. And then he moved to a company called The Real Real. And this is what he'll be speaking about today. He's taking a look back in time for us, relating an experience. At the same time, it's certainly a journey. It's a profitability journey, if I recall correctly. But this is Matt Gusky looking back in time to his chapter as CFO of RealReal.
Oh yeah, I mean I've been around the block, so there's quite a few. But I guess the one I'll use today is from my time at the RealReal. So the company's a managed marketplace for the resale of authenticated pre-owned luxury goods. That's a mouthful, but it's a consignment model, which means that the company takes possession of all the goods that it sells so that they can be authenticated, and also so that the company takes on all of the work of selling on behalf of the sellers, like taking the photos and writing the descriptions, pricing the product, fulfillment, customer service, everything. And naturally, with all of that work comes a lot of cost. So it was a challenge to define a path to profitability. Most of the resources in the company were and are in sales and operations positions. Salespeople are the people who bring in the products from consigners, often going to their homes and doing it. And the operations people performed all the functions I described in the warehouse or the authentication centers. So it was natural to focus a lot to be productive and efficient in those areas. And while certainly important, that wasn't sufficient. And the model that we had made that clear. But it was really about bringing the organization along to see more holistically about the what truly drove the profitability of the company. So I worked with my FP&A team to build a construct of all of the profitability levers in the company and which ones had the most leverage. And sometimes it was a little bit surprising or counterintuitive. And then we built a framework for how we proposed to get to break even. So the output of that was pretty clear. First, we weren't going to cost cut our way to profitability. We weren't going to drive so much productivity in the warehouses that alone could do it. So we needed to maintain a focus on growth to achieve a certain level of scale that would allow us to cover our fixed costs for things like warehouses and offices and overhead, so forth. So we reframed that. It's like, it's not growth at all costs. It's growth for a purpose. It's growth to get to scale. So we put out a specific number for GMV that was kind of the gold standard that would allow us to get to profitability, and reframed our focus from growth to profitable growth. Then we laid out how much leverage there were in other parts of the P&L and really up further toward the top of the P&L. So we used a unit economics framework for this and translated orders into gross profit dollars, variable costs, and fixed costs. And we showed that even with scale and variable expense efficiency, we still needed to improve the gross profit contribution on a per order basis. But at the time, there were no teams responsible for the gross profit levers, which included things like our take rate or the price, what we would keep from the order, average order value, and shipping costs. So we took it upon ourselves to set up cross-functional groups to build a strategy to improve these things. So we did a category and a price point profitability analysis. As take rates varied somewhat between categories. Generally, the lower priced goods would never be profitable given the high cost structure, which didn't vary all that much to process a cheaper item. And certain higher price categories were more profitable than others given competitive dynamics. For example, watches are really competitive, so we might only keep 12 to 15%, but a piece of jewelry at the same price point, we could maybe keep 30%. So we worked with all the teams, marketing, merchandising, sales, and product to build a pricing strategy, and by pricing the take rate, to increase our net take rate while maintaining or increasing our average order size, and at the same time improving the product selection and the vibrancy in the marketplace. So a couple of examples what that would have meant. It was taking a higher take rate for lower priced products and then working with the sales team to incentivize them to focus on our most profitable categories, things like jewelry and handbags and things like that. And then we built out a central operations team that had experience and responsibility negotiating and driving material savings and shipping costs. So just putting a lot more focus where we could drive a lot of leverage up on the top line. Then we laid out how much variable expense productivity would be needed if we did that. If we got the scale, we increased the gross profit contribution of the order, and we held fixed costs essentially flat, then we're kind of solving for now, what do we really truly need all those people expenses and how productive do they really need to be? And the answer was that if we could do all those other things, the improvements were actually modest and achievable if done consistently, wouldn't require step change. So that kind of gave everyone sort of a sigh of relief. So, okay, this is achievable, and got everybody sort of lined up against now. And the company is still on this journey, but you still see a lot of that framework in use today with a balanced focus across all three parts of the profitability equation, rather than just a maniacal focus on the most visible one.
Wow. Thank you for Matt Gusky once again for participating with us and sharing such a great chapter with us, just chock full of insights for us. Brett, what did you make of what Matt shared?
Yeah, I think Matt's conversation is an interesting follow-on to the last two, in that, as you say, he's trying to figure out what are the unique things that their business brings to market, and therefore what are their unique levers. And gosh, that's going to be a pretty complicated business, doing consignment of high value prestige items. And obviously it's a nice distinct sector that probably has fuzzy borders. At what point does it fit their criteria? But the fact that there are so many elements that will impact profitability. And what I liked is just his methodical way of looking at each component, trying to solve that part, then moving on to the next part. I once heard a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but the theory is, if you're in a submarine and it's sinking, what you do is you take one compartment, you bail it out and you seal it. Then you take the next compartment, you bail it out and seal it. And that's kind of what he's doing. He's taking each component, bailing it out, and then sealing it and moving on to the next one, right? So he hits some of the obvious things first in terms of how to make sure that we're getting good merchandise and so on. I like the second part where he says, well, we want to make sure that we focus on growth for a purpose. And that's an interesting statement, because you think, gosh, that doesn't make sense. Of course, the purpose of growth is growth. Like, what's growth for a purpose? Now, unfortunately, he never really answers for us what the answer is for him. But I think based on the rest of the conversation, I imply it's about profitable growth. It's not growth just for the sake of growth. It's growth for affecting profitability. And therefore, we need to be more careful about the products we choose and how we choose to process them. So I thought that was an interesting point. So get that compartment and bail it out. Now we understand there's attributes to the product we want to buy, and we need to make sure that we take as consignment, and we better make sure that things pass that test. If they don't pass that test, you don't go on to the next compartment. Like, that product we don't sell. Then he began looking, as he describes it, he began looking for other levers. So, what are the other compartments he can, bail out? And obviously, his comment that, gross profit is still critical. But to get gross profit, there are components of it like shipping that no one owned. And all of a sudden, he begins understanding that next compartment is a compartment that's leaking. There, we don't have control over those aspects. And I don't know, but I'm implying from what I heard that in this case, shipping might be significant. And I guess it could be. If it's a oil painting or something, I suppose there's a bunch of packaging and so on you need to do. But for whatever reason, that shipping is important and is proportional to product type. But again, there's probably no other business in the galaxy that would end up with having that as an important component that I now need to begin to figure out how to do. And so he's just methodically gone through each element and not look at it as a cost driver for planning purposes, but obviously as FP&A people, we would end up using it for that purpose. He was looking at it as cost drivers to understand cost management and how to manage the business. And so what I thought was interesting about his approach was we end up basically with a formula. And, if the product passes this test, then we have to see if it passes the cost profile test. In the example he used, it was about shipping. So it was just an interesting way to use the planning process as a way to help solidify what the strategy was. And again, I see that to be a step forward from Matt, where Matt used the metric to determine the strategy. Now we're kind of using the metric to fine tune the strategy and be a bit more precise.
You know, what I wrote down, jotted down for him, and there might be a conversation around this, I don't know. One of the phrases he kept on saying was, we needed growth to get to scale. The expression get to scale. What are we getting to when we're getting to scale? We're getting to a critical size where our metrics become more uniform, where the formula for growth becomes more predictable. What is scale? Getting to scale. Well, I think
in my interpretation of what he said is, for him, scale is where the cost to acquire the business is less than the profit made from the business. So because it's consignment, I'm buying and selling stuff, if the cost to get that item and to document it and verify it and to ship it is greater than the revenue I can get or the spread I get between the product, then that's not attractive. What's interesting about what he's done that's probably beat his competitors is he's looked at each element of the equation and been able to quantify what does success look like? What would need to be true for us to pass that test? What does need to be true about the product? What needs to be true about, in his example, shipping? But there's probably other components, right? His closing comment to me was, as we would say, the pièce de résistance. He said, we need to balance focus across all three parts of the profitability equation. So to me, that expresses everything about what he's done. And again, what he's done is he's used that golden KR to help inform not what the strategy is, but how we execute the strategy. And so it's almost like the complete loop on the three stories that we've heard today that, it's be careful. What's that old quote that the plan is nothing, planning is everything, right? Or, restate another way, every plan fails in first contact with the enemy. However you take a look at it, the idea is these things are all connected. And the idea of what Rob's brought to bear is the idea of once we get that formula correct, we can correctly execute the strategy. And we have that agility or the flexibility. So scale is across all three elements. What do I need? What needs to be true for that activity to seem like a profitable one for this business to engage in? And what's important, I think, here is normally when you think of scale, I'm, manufacturing a coffee mug. And I need to scale how I can manufacture more of these things at a lower cost. The dilemma is everything he touches is different. Like once it's an oil painting, the next time it's a watch, the next time it's a piece of jewelry, the next time, it's a statue, whatever it might be. He's got to come up with an equation that works across all products. It's focused on the process, not the product.
Wow. Nice. Once again, it's great to hear how you synthesize all of what's been shared with us on a given episode. How about lending us a hand and label it or title it?
Yeah, I don't think there's one lesson to be learned here. I think.
What about the golden KR? I think that had marquee qualities.
If anything, if you can figure out what the golden KR is or the golden formula for your business, sometimes, like we heard with Rob, that's going to inform how you do a transaction or what looks like a good transaction or a bad one. Sometimes, like we heard with Matt, that's actually going to inform the strategy. And sometimes, like we heard with Joel, that secret formula, in his case, the rule of 40, informs how we manage the business, how we make sure that we're executing on the strategy. So we've heard three stories. The center of each one is about getting that formula correct and not being biased about what is the right formula for someone else in my sector. Right? For Joel, his rule of 40 is different than the other rule of 40 that we've seen, but it works for his business, his sector. Obviously, for what Rob has, I would, it's such a unique business, but he's figured out in that unique business how to make a formula that allows the business to scale.
Well, our business is done here then. Safe travels, Brett.
Okay, catch up with you later.
On behalf of Brett Knowles and Jack Sweeney, as always, thank you for listening.